Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
All right, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash. I'm here with Zina Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the Colonie Library. If you don't know the premise of our show, what Zina and I do, we go down to the new bookshelf here in the library, and we go to the technical services department where all the new books are being processed, and we bring up a whole bunch of new books, and we're going to tell you about some. So Zina, as usual, will be going first.
Okay. There was quite a choice this time around of wonderful new books. I picked this one first because of its kind of local connection. It's called The Dirty Life on Farming, Food, and Love by a Kristen Kimball. Now, it tells the story of, it's nonfiction, it's true. She tells the story of how she met her husband, who was involved with farming and agriculture. She was a writer in New York City, freelance writer, and she was in her 30s, single, and she interviewed him. She had to travel outside New York City to interview her, someone who became her husband, about farming, about community-supported agriculture. And she wound up falling in love with him, and they bought a farm in near Lake Champlain. It's called Essex Farm. Apparently, it's a well-known farm. It's a 500-acre farm, and it's the story. She presents the story of how she got pulled into this very different kind of life than what she was used to. My husband comes from a dairy farm family, and although I wasn't a 30-something living in the city, I certainly wasn't used to the farming life. And she talks about, and so it brings back some of the things that I felt when I was brought to a farm, a real working farm. And it talks about how he won over not only her, but her family with his incredible cooking with totally fresh ingredients, including meat. They now run Essex Farm. They have for quite a while, and their farm feeds 100 local families. And it's quite humorous. It's also a love story, and it has local connections. The Dirty Life on Farming, Food, and Love. Joe?
Okay, that sounds pretty interesting. Now, I'm going to start with some books today that a lot of times when we talk about the books, we've had reviews or, we skim them. The first couple I'm going to talk about, I'm actually reading. But anyway, this first book I'm almost done with. I'm 3/4 of the way done, and I was reading it this weekend. It is a real page turner. It's called Play Their Hearts Out, a sports book. A Coach, His Star Recruit, and the Youth Basketball Machine by George Dorman. This book is an absolutely devastating portrait of the youth AAU basketball in California and how the kids are used, and the sneaker companies have a lot of influence, and it's really, in fact, I predict, Zina.
Yes, Joe.
I predict that this book will spark a congressional investigation into AAU basketball. It's that devastating.
Oh.
And the writer didn't just go out, report on it, and go to some games. He followed this coach and this group of players for 8 years, from 6th grade to when they got out of high school. In fact, I'm 3/4 of the way done, and the kids are only still in 8th grade, and they've already been through. They're already sick of basketball. They can't stand it, and hence the ironic title, "Play Their Hearts Out." There was an excerpt a few weeks ago in Sports Illustrated that much commented on, and this is the book. It just came out, and right now the book centers on Demetrius Walker. Right now, he's a red shirt. That means he has to sit out a year at New Mexico. And he's already been around. He played for all these different teams. And it's absolutely devastating. And it's a book, I think, anyone watching involved with AAU basketball. I mean, I'm sure not every team is like this, but this is the big time where these 6th and 7th graders are sponsored by Adidas and Nike. It's unbelievable, and the kids end up, and actually, another sad part of the book, the parents kind of go along with all this, so it's a really great book, but it's just a devastating portrait of AAU basketball. And if you like sports, and in fact, it's ultimately not about sports. I mean, you probably would like this book, Zina, because it's all about raising kids and doing right by the kids.
Yeah, I was just going to say, parents need to read.
So it ultimately is not really about sports. Yes, it's about a basketball player, and the main character, Demetrius Walker, comes across as a really good kid, but his heart is. By the 8th grade, he doesn't feel like playing anymore. That's as far as I've gotten, but I was zipping through it this weekend. It's really a page turner. I couldn't put it down.
Good.
So, Play Their Hearts Out by George Dorman. Zina?
Okay. This is also about farming. This is Growing a Garden City, how farmers, first graders, counselors, troubled teens, foodies, homeless shelter, etc., are transforming themselves in their neighborhoods through the intersection of local agriculture and community, and how you can too. So it's a beautifully illustrated description of how the city of Missoula, Montana, came together. The university in Missoula, the government, and local farmers, and some social workers all came together to create a community-supported agriculture system in Missoula. Now, Missoula, they said that there's 20% of Missoula's population live in poverty. They also, the university also said that today it's ironic that we have an incredible obesity problem, but like 1 in 4 families often don't have enough food to eat on a daily basis. So they attempted through several programs interconnected to create an atmosphere of eating and growing locally, farm food, through their own local farms, food for many people to eat, including the impoverished in Missoula. So it has beautiful photographs of the successful farms that they began and are still using, and it talks about how a community through its different governmental organizations and its schools can actually create locally sustainable agricultural systems that can battle both poverty and our obesity problems. It talks about how they have troubled teens working on these farms by choice, how local poor people can trade, work on the farms for some of the food to come back to them. And it talks about the educational programs in the schools and at the university level. So it's called, I highly recommend it. It's very interesting, it's beautiful, it's a how-to as well as how it has been done. Growing a Garden City by Jeremy Smith.
Okay, here's another new book that I am in the middle of reading. When I tell people, I'm always reading 3 or 4 books at once. Some people think that's kind of strange.
No, I do that
Some people
too.
say, I can only read 1 book at a time. But anyway, here's a book, a brand new book that I'm reading, and I'm reading it nice and slow because I don't want it to end. That's how good it is, but it probably will have a limited appeal when I tell you what it is. But anyway, it is a biography of Robert A. Heinlein, the great science fiction writer of the 20th century.
Dune, right?
No, that's Frank Herbert.
Oh,
but anyway,
got it wrong.
Robert A. Heinlein, great science fiction writer, from the 1940s on. And I'm reading it nice and slow because it's really good. If you've read any of Heinlein or know anything about him, you'll love this book. It's very interesting about growing up in Missouri, small town. He went to Annapolis, how he became a writer. Right now I'm at the part where it's World War II, so he took time off during World War II. And the other good thing about this book, besides telling all about Heinlein and this and that, it's only volume 1. So I can't wait for volume 2. It probably won't be out for a few years. This book covers from his birth in 1907 up to 1948, just when he was starting to become very, very famous. But it does cover his sort of his the future history stories, one of his great works on The Man Who Sold the Moon, If This Goes On, The Green Hills of Earth. And so that he wrote most of those in the 40s. So this doesn't get into later on. I have to say he became kind of wacky later on. Some of his books.
He lived a long life?
Yes, he lived to the late 90s.
Well, maybe we can blame it on dementia.
Well, Stranger in a Strange Land.
That's
yes.
the one.
So some of his books kind of veer off into, I mean, they're still good, but they really veer off into some wackiness.
Well,
but anyway.
2 volumes is like,
yeah, and this is volume
good.
1. It's just called Robert A. Heinlein in Dialogue with His Century, William A. Patterson Jr. Really, if you love Heinlein, you'll love this book because it tells you all about him. It doesn't really, one little quibble I have, it's minor. He doesn't really analyze or talk about the stories too much. He'll just say something like, he finished by his bootstraps and sent it off to Amazing Stories. But I think maybe the other ones, because in this part, up to 48, he really didn't write too many novels yet. He was still a short story writer. So after 48, the next volume will probably cover his amazing writing. So, I mean, I like this book because Heinlein's one of my all-time favorite authors. So it may have limited appeal, but if you love Heinlein, you'll like this book.
That's okay. This show is about what strikes our fancy and what we think might have a little niche
And this volume 1 is called Learning Curve, 1907 to 1948. So new biography, Robert A. Heinlein.
Good.
So, yeah.
Okay, I picked this book because it would be something that I would never, ever be interested in, except when I started to read it, it's interesting. It's about eels. Now, I don't like slimy things, so when I think eels, I think slimy. But the librarian who bought this, I just had a quick conversation with him. He said that he was actually in the wilds with his kids and his brother, and his brother knew they saw an eel, and his brother knew about these eels. Now, they're actually, these are about eels that spawn in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean, in a part of the Atlantic Ocean called Sargasso Sea. The Sargasso Sea, I guess it's part of the Bermuda Triangle. It's a warm water part of the ocean, and it's part of a lot of stories in the past. It's kind of a mysterious section of the North Atlantic, and the eels spawn there and mate and spawn there, and then they go to freshwater to live their lives. Obviously they've in New England, that's where the author is from, and they travel to Italy and New Zealand, but they go up the rivers and tributaries and spend their life not in the ocean. So that's kind of apparently the opposite of what most fish do. And so that's one of the things that is curious about these eels. And also, the scientists no one has ever witnessed a mating and spawning of these eels. I guess that's a great unknown in the biological world. So it's a mystery. And it talks about, it relates all the natural history of the eels, and it talks about how eels in the New Zealand culture, native culture, the eels are iconic, and they're revered figures in their literature and in their art. And it talks about how they're eaten as delicacies in large parts of the world, including England and Italy, as well as New England. And it's written very well. There are no pictures, I'm glad to say. I did this except for this cover artwork, and so it made it easier for me to read about slimy fish. They are a fish, and so I recommend it. It's something different. I made my way, I'm about through half of it. So eels.
Okay.
An exploration from New Zealand to the Sargasso of the world's most mysterious fish by James Prossek, P-R-O-S-E-K.
All right, that looks like a book that David probably ordered.
He did, David Cole.
All right, now, I'll keep the theme going for the first 3 books. Here's another book that I am 3/4 of the way through. I'm almost done with it. It's another really good book. However, the library, we have 2 copies, but it's checked out, so I'm going to hold up the box of the audio. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. It's called Hitch 22, Christopher Hitchens' memoir. We all know who Christopher Hitchens is, I think.
Conservative writer, thinker.
Well, he started out as
famous atheist.
famous atheist, but he started out, he's not really, I wouldn't say he's conservative. That's one of the things this book is about. He started out a sort of raving Marxist lefty, and this book is really, part of the book is his intellectual journey to sort of what I would say now he's an independent thinker. I mean, he's really on some things, he's still kind of liberal. Some things he's pretty conservative now, but overall, it's about his thinking process. Not his thinking process. He's an independent thinker. You never know what he might say on a certain topic, and he's a wonderful writer, storyteller, and it's not really a chronological memoir. It does start out with his parents and going to boarding school, but the book is really divided by themes and. For example, he has a chapter about the 60s, what it was like, protesting against the Vietnam War in England and everything. It's very, very interesting. And he writes, he's very good friends with, his best friends are Martin Amis, the poet James Fenton, Ian McEwan. He's also very good friends with Ted Hughes, the poet, Salman Rushdie. And he writes about friendship very poignantly, and better than I've ever, seen, particularly friendship among men, I mean, I guess you could say, but he really, and they have these Friday lunches or something, and they all get together, and just they would have great discussions and talk and everything. And he, anyway, and then he was a journalist. He wrote for the New Statesman, the New York Review of Books, and he's always got something to say about everything. He did write a book called God Is Not Great, which Salman Rushdie said was one word too long, but the title. But he also has a chapter which is, some of this book is very funny. He has a chapter in here on how he became an American. And first he explains why he became an American, which is very moving, actually. But when you have to take a test to become a citizen, and here he is, he's a writer, he studied American history. He kind of, sort of to be blunt about, he knew more about American history than the people sort of giving him the test. But he didn't really come out and say it, but it's a very funny chapter. But he really does love America, and his chapter on 9/11 is worth the price of the book. It's the best thing I've read about 9/11. You'll have to read that chapter. It's really good. So I'm about 3/4 of the way done. A wonderful book. His memoirs of his parents, his father, who he called the commander. He was in the Navy, and and his mother committed suicide, and he had some difficulties with her, which is really very interesting. But overall, if you know anything about Christopher Hitchens. At the moment, he's suffering from esophageal cancer, and he's been receiving a lot of well wishes from around the world. But very interesting guy, a great writer, and just a wonderful book. And it's all, like I say, his chapters on becoming an American and 9/11 are just worth the price of the book. It's really, really good. So it's called Hitch 22. The title obviously refers to Catch 22. It's Christopher Hitchens' memoir. Okay, Zina?
I want to say a word about, I love Christopher Hitchens. I can't say I've read a lot of his stuff, but I've seen him interviewed many times, and he is such a clear thinker. He's able to...
That's what I would say. I think he's transcendent. He's transcended left and right, and he's just a level-headed, clear thinker, any topic. He's kind of unique, I think.
I think he is, and I've watched him on Charlie Rose several times. That's the PBS show on 11:30 at night, and he interviews, Charlie Rose interviews all sorts of authors and writers and cultural people, and Hitchens is he was for a proponent of the Iraq War, and he can explain things. He explains his position in a way that very few people can do in our soundbite world.
And then the added bonus to this book, if you do listen to the audio, which I'm listening to, he reads it. It's not read by.
Oh, really? Oh,
so he reads it. So you really, it's his own. And you really get a taste of it. Oh, yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful. So anyway, next book for you, Zina.
So Hitchens is kind of an iconoclastic persona, and this falls into that category. This is a Best Americans series. This one always volume always catches my attention. It's called The Best American Non-Required Reading. edited by Dave Edgars and introduced by Dave Sedaris this year. It's an annual. They have Best American Short Stories, Best American Mystery, Best American Essays.
There's 20 or 30 of them.
Right, and this one, the Best American Non-Required Reading, always catches my eye. So I know, there's not a lot of people who read collections. They go for the full-length nonfiction or fiction book, and I just think this series is fantastic. This is funny. It's funny, this non-required reading, but it's also serious. There's actually teenagers who pick a popularity contest, in effect. Some teenagers who get together for several months to read an incredible array of writing, and that includes comics and graphic novels and all sorts of different things, and they pick the best every year. And
that book also has stuff from online source.
Yes.
That's a really interesting one, the non-required reading.
It really is. This says that they try to strike a balance between fiction, nonfiction, comics, and other forms. Most of all, we try to balance between end-of-the-world scenarios and coming-of-age stories, because those two topics are 80% of what they read in a given year, and we've decided that a few examples of each are enough. But it's just nothing. It's nothing that I would come across in my daily reading. Most of what's included in here, and they do include, as I said, comics, and it's just an out of the ordinary selections, and you might not find these kinds of bits of writing in anything else in our library. So I highly recommend it if you want to try something different. And at the same time, I want to plug the Best American series that we have, Best American Essays. See, this year was edited by
Christopher Hitchens.
Christopher
Yes.
Hitchens. So I wanted to bring that up as well. But these essays are in more academic and intellectual magazines. It includes things from New York Times as well. But it just brings to the forefront some of what are more academic.
Well, there's popular
people.
magazines in there too.
Well, yeah, but it's still, well, I guess it is. You're right. Excuse me.
I mean, it's a combination.
You're right.
It's a combination of both.
You're right. Okay, so they also have the Best American Mystery Stories. And the Best American Sports Writing.
Best American Travel.
Right. So it's they're in different parts of the library according to the topic. They're not all in.
There's Best American Science Writing. There's all.
So I highly recommend the series. There you go, Joe.
Very good. All right, I'm going to talk about. We don't talk about fiction. I don't talk about fiction too much because I don't know. It just seems like there's so many books out there. But anyway, here's a book. I'll cover 100 fiction titles in one book. So how's that? It's called Thrillers, 100 Must Reads. So if you like thrillers, and the definition in here is pretty wide when I read, when I tell you what some of them are. They've taken a lot of the members of the International Thriller Writers Association, and they're all people that, if you follow contemporary fiction, you'll know a lot of these people. Lee Child, Sandra Brown, Tess Garrison, Heather Graham, Jeffrey Deaver, Michael Palmer, David Baldacci, et cetera. So you know all those names. So these 100 people all chose, they did a survey or they did something, and they chose the 100 must-read thrillers. And it's chronological. It isn't just like the best books and they're in order. So we start out with Theseus and the Minotaur, obviously from the Greek myth or something. The Iliad and the Odyssey are second. Beowulf, Macbeth. So you get the idea. And it ends with the last one and each essay is about 2 or 3 pages, and each author explains why they chose it, and why it's included in this book, why that work was important to the genre and its influence on people, So it's very interesting. But to give you an idea, it starts out with the Iliad and the Odyssey, Macbeth, Robinson Crusoe, and then it ends with books that we probably you may have read. The Da Vinci Code's the last one on here. The Bone Collector by Jeffrey Deaver. Jeffrey Deaver is very popular. Lee Child, Killing Floor. That book just came out. Killing Floor came out about 10 years ago. Absolute Power by David Baldacci. Point of Impact. Along Came a Spider, James Patterson. So and everything between Beowulf and Macbeth up to that, and it's very interesting what they include as a thriller. Like, for example, Rudyard Kipling's book Kim. Of course, Kim was one of the first spy novels, I think. So that's sort of Hound of the Baskervilles, of course, Conan Doyle. Heart of Darkness, The Sea Wolf by Jack London. It just runs through, and then you get into all the modern books like The Day of the Jackal, The Bourne Identity.
Wow, that's
Hunt for Red October.
That
And each
sounds
essay,
great.
I read a few of them. The essays are very interesting. They're only 2 or 3 pages long each. So here's,
how to choose what you want to read,
Yeah.
what you might want to read.
and it gives you a good history of the genre, because in the introduction the guy says it's important to sort of know, your roots or whatever. So it looks like very interesting. And all the authors who write you may not have heard of all 100 people who write the essays, but the people I just named all write little essays too, and when they pick their choice, like Lee Child and all those guys. So thrillers, 100 must-reads, edited by David Morrell and Hank Wagner. David Morrell writes he writes a whole series. I forgot the name of him. He's a very popular writer too. So.
Well, that sounds good. I'm going to look at that because it'll prompt me in my own reading, and maybe it'll, as a generalist and needing to know a lot about a little about a lot of things. That sounds really good. Maybe it could be used by some of our kids when they're doing book reviews and trying to choose what to read for their summer reading or whatever else. That's really
the introduction is very interesting. But what constitutes a thriller and all that.
okay. Okay, my next is kind of a departure. It's a how-to book. It's How to Disappear. Erase your digital footprint, leave false trails, and vanish without a trace. It says, from the world's top expert. His name is Frank M. Ahern, Ahearn. These kinds of books tend to disappear from our collection. But they also intrigue me. This one is sort of from the opposite end of what we usually have in our collection. It's usually how to find people who have disappeared. This writer, Frank Ahern, made a living by finding people who wanted to disappear or who seemed to have disappeared. And he did it he describes how he and his partner did it sometimes, how they wheedled information out of public employees or corporate employees in semi-illegal fashion sometimes. I know we watch crime shows on TV and someone is always sweet-talking somebody else for information, or you owe me a favor, so give me this information. So he pretty much verifies that that's how a lot of it is done when has been done when you're looking for someone who wants to disappear.
Do they say why they want to disappear?
Well, he says, let's see if I can find this. He said, he said in 1997, when news broke of President Clinton's dalliance with a White House intern, Ahern was hired to find her. It says, when Russell Crowe threw a telephone at a hotel clerk in 2005, Ahern located the victim and hid him from the media. No. So it's that kind of scenario that he was part of. But he decided it was too dangerous. I guess they were on the edge of the law too often, so they backed away from it, and he wrote this book. He and his partner about actually how to disappear, how to avoid people like himself and his partner, and so how to erase any trace of yourself, and how to leave false clues. And it sounds like establishing your own witness protection system. But actually, a lot of it's very, very useful information. He does talk a lot about online digital presence and and so I think that for parents and for anybody in the professional field, certainly, who wants to make sure that they're not leaving stuff out there online in cyberspace that it could be damaging or is false, he offers plenty of really good tips as well. So that's one of the reasons I was reading it. I was interested in what he said about online clues and your presence. And so I recommend it. I think it's written well. It's very interesting. It's short. How to Disappear and Erase Your Digital Footprint, Leave False Trails, and Vanish Without a Trace by Frank Ahern.
Yes, we probably all know people we'd like to give that book to.
I know, and that book may disappear
Well, speaking
quickly.
of that, in my 20-odd years of being a librarian, one of the most popular books in my whole career as a librarian, everywhere I've worked, you probably know this title. It's called How to Locate Almost Anyone Anywhere. And that book is always missing from libraries I've worked in.
That's the one. That's it.
Okay, here's a book that it looks very interesting. We have an excellent cookbook section. Now this book is called American Vegan Kitchen, but it isn't about vegan cooking like you're going to be thinking. What she does in this book here, the author is Thomason Noyes, I guess you would say that name. That show, what's that show? Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives.
Yeah.
What she does is she talks about comfort food and why we love things like deli sandwiches, burger and fries, mac and cheese, pasta,
why
pizza,
we like them?
omelets, pancakes,
fat and sugar,
stuff like that. But these are the vegan versions of all that. And if you look at, maybe you can see the pictures. If you look at some of these pictures, they don't look like vegan meals. They look very like they'd have 5,000 calories each in all of them.
Now, vegan is more than a vegetarian, right? A vegan isn't just no meat. It's, I think, no dairy. There is a philosophy behind it.
She calls it American Vegan Kitchen. And the three main ingredients that you use, I guess, if you're a vegan, for the protein or the meat substitute, tofu, tempeh. That's
soy. They're both soy.
Yeah, and seitan.
Don't know.
And when she talks about how you can even make seitan, you make it out of flour and stuff. It's called wheat meat. And there's a picture in here. I don't know if you can see it. It's like a ribs right up here.
Oh, look at that.
But it's made out of this seitan stuff. But it looks like a rack of ribs. So anyway, it's got beer battered onion rings, jalapeno gravy. So it's sort of the comfort foods from the vegan version, I guess you could say. Deli potato salad, ranch dressing, Asian slaw, Mighty Miso soup, Bistro French onion soup, but again, Route 66 seitan sandwiches. It's the vegan version of all those kind of things that you think is really high calorie and fattening. So it looks very interesting. American Vegan Kitchen, and the subtitle is Delicious Comfort Food from Blue Plate Specials to Home Style Favorites. So it looks like a diner kind of book, but it's the healthy version. All right, we'll do a couple more because we're getting close to the end here.
This is called The Pledge, A History of the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I've always learned about the Star-Spangled Banner, but I have to say that I didn't know anything about the Pledge of Allegiance except that the part of the pledge under God was included in the 1950s, that it wasn't in the original one. So this says, it was written in 1892 by a former clergyman, Francis Bellamy, and on a evening in Boston. Who would have suspected that the simple flag salute would become a lightning rod for bitter controversy? So this is about the history of what the pledge started out, how it started out, and all its permutations through 100 years. Includes the controversies about the inclusion of under God in the pledge. So I thought in our election year, when religion in our public life is always part of our conversation at election time, I thought people might be interested in this. The Pledge, A History of the Pledge of Allegiance by Jeffrey Owen Jones.
Okay, we'll do one more. This is show 13, and this book I'm going to talk about was on our new bookshelf, even though it's about a year old. But every time we filmed this show, I always went down to look for it, to bring it up and talk about. It's always been checked out for the whole last year. So even though it's a year old, it was on our new bookshelf, hence it qualifies for our show. This is David B. and Cooley's book. It's called Dangerously Funny: The Uncensored Story of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. We all remember that show and all the issues that they had for censorship and freedom of speech. And, you know, we forget, besides all that's controversial, whatever you want to say, the show was very funny. They had great comedy skits. They had great musical guests. You know, we're dating ourselves.
We really are.
They had on like the Who and the Beatles and whatever, and Buffalo Springfield.
The Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert's of.
Yes. So the book is it's a history of their show, why it was important, not just for the suit they brought against CBS and the censorship issues, but it's really a look at the show. It was sort of the cutting edge comedy of its time. You know, Steve Martin was one of the writers.
Yes.
Before he was a comedian, and I think I can't think of his name now. Was David Steinberg was on all the time. So this book, when it came out last year, got great reviews. Like I say, for the last 12 shows, I always went down to get it. It was always checked out, so it's gone out like 20 times. But it looks like a good book, a book I want to read. Dangerously fun. It got, like I say, it got great reviews, and you know, there'd be no Jon Stewart today if these guys didn't sort of pave the way, I guess.
Seinfeld, I don't know. It's funny.
And David, the author, you might know if you listen to Fresh Air on the radio on the Terry Gross. David B. and Cooley does a lot of the movie and TV reviews, so you may know that name. But anyway, it's the uncensored story of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. It's called Dangerously Funny. Is that it for this time?
That's it. Just to repeat that this list of books that we've reviewed will be on our website under, just click on New Books and go to the blog page. And if you're interested in any of these books, you can also call our information desk and ask about putting a reserve on these books. Joe?
All right. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on So Many Books, So Little Time.